Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. A gentleman that interacted with a little bit when I was in the life sciences business was Neil Fraser, who is the CEO of Medtronic, and he's recently announced his retirement. And so I thought it would be really interesting to check in with him, hear a little bit about his career, hear a little bit about life sciences, medical devices, the healthcare life sciences space in Canada. And also what he sort of sees as the future of health, of medicine, of medical devices, etc. And so I wanted to welcome Neil Fraser to the show. Sir, how are you?
Thank you very much. I'm doing very well.
Congratulations on your retirement, which I understand is not really quite yet happening, but may in the future happen.
It's in process. I'm in a transition phase.
So tell us a little bit, if you could, about sort of your career, how you came to be CEO of Medtronic.
Yeah, well, in fact, Medtronic wasn't my first career. I worked in products research with Procter & Gamble for a few years out in Hamilton, and was involved in inventing new products for them, such as household cleaners. And cake mixes.
Cake mixes, that would have been fun.
Yeah, that was fun. And then later I worked for Alcan, which is now Rio Tinto, as you know. And I was involved in introducing the aluminum can to Canada. And the key challenge there was that there were regulatory barriers, because there were concerns that aluminum, would not decompose in the waste stream.
Yeah.
But in fact, it could be recycled, which was our point, and it added great value to the recycling stream. And so we ended up initiating curbside recycling in Toronto. So the blue bins were originally Alcan contributed blue bins.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And,
that's interesting.
yeah, but so that resulted in beverage cans allowing aluminum to be used, and in fact is the preferred material now. So then that led.
That's kind of cake mix and aluminum cans doesn't sort of sound similar to medical devices to me.
That's right. Well, I think that although I enjoyed those earlier small careers, I was looking for something that was more gratifying and meaningful. And so I had the very good fortune of meeting people in the early days of Medtronic, and in fact met the founder of the company, and learned a lot about the mission of the company. And as I had some background in biomedical engineering, I'm an engineer by training, as you know. Mm-hmm. It really was an exciting time to get into the industry. And our founder, as you may know, was the inventor of the battery-powered pacemaker that led to the modern pacemaker. And so Medtronic participated in a lot of the technology developments, first in cardiology, and then later in many fields of medicine. And so it was really exciting to be part of that, and to see it grow, and to see transitions that have happened in healthcare. In the early days, healthcare was primarily physician driven, and then later you had administration and procurement come in to kind of look after the needs of the system rather than just please individual doctors. And now you have the system that we have today that's more accountable really to taxpayers and patients, as well as the health of the whole system. Although that's being challenged, of course, through the pandemic and the challenges with recovery that we're seeing.
So when we first ran into each other, I was the chief financial officer of a pharmaceutical company. And I remember the statistic that people would often tell us is that, historically, 85% of healthcare dollars were spent on hospitals and doctors, and 15% on pills. medicine, and that over time it went to about 50-50. And so therefore the share of healthcare spending that was taken up by pharmaceuticals increased fairly dramatically as it was a cheaper way, a better way of helping people rather than having them go to the hospital. And then I was told that medical devices were having a comparable kind of an impact on the healthcare spending. Tell us, if you could, sort of the trajectory of Medtronic's equipment and other equipment and devices, and how it's become, I believe, far more important in healthcare and healthcare spending.
Yeah, I think it's still the amount of spending on medical devices is still much lower than drugs. It's still in sort of the single-digit % of total healthcare spend, but yeah, it has increased as devices have come into more and more fields. And today, I guess it's getting into wearables and home monitoring and things like that. So, but I would say it's still less than 10% of total healthcare spend, and I think that is low, actually, compared to where I think it needs to be, because technology can really make a difference in many different disease states. It can be curative, or it can be very much enabling of the patient's lifestyle. And also it can help the healthcare system to manage patients remotely, so they can be in their home instead of in the hospital or in a care facility. So there's many benefits to technology. So I think you'll see that it will continue to grow, albeit slowly overall.
I understand that wearables are increasing dramatically. Tell us, if you could, what wearables are.
Well, there's quite a range. I mean, I'm wearing an Apple Watch, and it's a watch, but it also monitors my heart rate. But and this is not a medical grade one, but there increasingly are medical grade consumer electronics like that. But there also are devices that are in patients' home that can monitor things like blood pressure and blood sugar and many other critical variables that are important to manage physiologically for the patient, that can keep them out of critical care and out of care facilities.
I saw an advertisement for a T-shirt or yoga pants that had a whole bunch of monitoring devices sewn into and included right in the fabric of the T-shirt or the yoga pants. It was fascinating.
Yeah, it's like Star Trek. It's definitely coming.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in about 2 minutes with Neil Fraser, the president of Medtronic Canada. And I'm going to ask him about his career, and I'm going to ask him about some of the advisory boards that he has served on, some of the impact that he has had on the life sciences business in Canada. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. As some of you may know, I spent about 20 years in and out of the life sciences business, in a pharmaceutical business, in a botanical pharmaceutical business, in a medical device business. And one of the gentlemen that I interact with a couple different times in that process, in that career, and that I followed because he was a real leading light, a leader within the life sciences business in Canada, was Neil Fraser, who just recently announced his retirement as president of Medtronic. His office was about a block away from my office in northern Mississauga at the time, and we were involved in Mississauga Summit issues and life sciences issues, and he really was a gentleman that thought wider than just Medtronic. He was involved in a bunch of different associations and organizations that were trying to help Mississauga, that were trying to help medical devices, that were trying to help life sciences in Canada. And so I thought it'd be really interesting to check in with him and talk a little bit about his career. 38 years in one spot at Medtronic. The average life of a CEO supposedly today is like 5 years or something like that, and the average tenure for people in companies is about the same. But you were at Medtronic for 38 years. How did you survive?
Well, it's really interesting, but there've been so many amazing sort of eras and phases in healthcare, and also in more recent years, as you mentioned, I've gotten much more involved in public policy because not only are there patients that need treatment, I think the system needs some treatment as well. And so I've really enjoyed getting involved with public decision makers and encouraging them to look at healthcare differently, and particularly from the angle of the application of technology, because that's really my bag and my interest. So I think that it's always kept it fresh and interesting throughout the 38 years, believe it or not.
You didn't start as president, I presume.
No, that's right. No, I started actually in the neuroscience field, and then cardiac surgery, cardiology, endocrinology. So that's the other thing is always shifting focus to different areas of medical pursuit and opportunities for technology. So that kept it also very, very fresh over those years.
And how long have you been president of Medtronic?
For 18 years, in
years.
fact.
Now, yeah. Medtronic is a U.S. company, is that correct?
Yes. We're based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And
so you've been president of the Canadian operation. Tell me, how did you interact with the U.S. headquarters?
Yeah, well, it's varied over time because some of the time we've had sort of an international division, which has been based either in Europe or in Asia. So some of the time I was regularly commuting to those locations for staff meetings and to work with colleagues from around the world. So that also made it very interesting. In the last 5 years, I've been reporting directly to Minneapolis. So I've learned a lot about health systems around the world. And, I've seen how Medtronic has been focused on improving access to life-saving technology all around the world. And I think it's very, very exciting to see how, we're moving the needle on patients' survival and on patients' quality of life, regardless of where they're located in the world.
Tell me a little bit about patient survival and quality of life. How does a device actually help that?
Yeah, well, the most basic device that we make is a pacemaker, so patients who there's a percentage of pacemaker patients who do not have an innate heart rate that will sustain life. So it needs to be either replaced or augmented with a device, that will ensure that their heart beats 70 times a minute to allow the circulation of blood and to keep the patient active and conscious. So that would be the most extreme and obvious one. But there are devices that replace heart valves, that open arteries in the heart and in the periphery of the body. There are devices involved in repairing damage or degenerating spine. There are devices that help with tremors, that help with pain. There are devices that replace an artery that's had an aneurysm, that basically cover the aneurysm and allow the blood to flow freely and not grow an aneurysm. So many examples that we have that are really exciting and are life sustaining.
I understand that a lot of these devices now actually have some capability of communicating outside of the body with some sort of computer or something like that. Is that the case?
Yeah, we have increasingly devices also capture physiologic data on the patient if they've had incidents that the doctor needs to know about. So they can store those and then transmit them back to the hospital. And a patient has a transponder on their nightstand, and the device downloads the data to the transmitter and then that's transmitted to the hospital, and so the physician can see what's happened. So that's true of many of our cardiology devices. It's true of our diabetes devices. So increasingly, we're adding that capability because we can.
And am I correct in some of these devices really carry pharmaceutical products as well? You know, you mentioned stents. I think there's drug-coated stents, is there not?
Yes, that's right. Stents do have coatings that basically attenuate an inflammatory response that would result in the artery closing again. So that's proven to be very effective in keeping arteries open. But we also have implantable drug pumps that infuse drugs directly into the spinal fluid or into the brain. So yeah, there is sort of a hybrid between pharmaceutical and medical device in those cases.
Fascinating. I think a lot of us would understand potentially how a stent would work opening up an artery. How does a pacemaker actually work? What does it do? Does it like shock the heart?
Well, there is a kind of pacemaker that's called an implantable defibrillator that actually does shock the heart. But there's really two kinds of broad syndromes. One is if your heart is slow, like I described, in which case you're just providing a pulse that creates a beat in your heart. So it's not a shock; it's a very subtle, electrical impulse. On the other hand, when your heart beats uncontrollably fast, then the shock treatment, it's just like the paramedics when they put the paddles on the patient and shock them,
right?
Except this is done internally, and it allows you to kind of stop the electrical activity of the heart when it's become uncontrollable, and then it restarts it. So that's the way that works.
What's a device that either Medtronic or someone else is currently developing that really excites you, that you think really is the cutting edge of technology, medical devices?
Well, in a previous show of yours, we talked about the implementation of surgical assist robots, and we recently in Halifax did our first spinal robotic assisted surgery. And what that does is it allows the surgeon greater precision, and it reduces the time really to locate the appropriate landmarks to do the surgery. So it's very exciting because it can improve both the outcomes and the time involved in the procedure. So the surgeon could potentially do more with his surgical time.
So is this a robot that's the same size as us, or is it a little tiny microscopic robot, or what?
Yeah, there's all kinds of them. In this case, it's really a robot arm, but it's connected with a navigation system. So it creates a coordinate system around the patient that allows you to locate exactly the place where you want to make an incision, or where you want to insert a surgical screw, or things like that.
Fascinating. That's really quite interesting. Medtronic, does Medtronic Canada do research, do manufacturing, or are you just selling the things that are developed and manufactured in the United States?
Actually, we do all of the above. Our plants tend to be have a world mandate. So we have a plant in Quebec, in Pointe Claire, that makes products for atrial fibrillation ablation. It was the former company called CryoCath, which we acquired in about 2005, and it's grown to be very highly successful in this field. So that's one example. In terms of research, Canada has great facility with research. Many of our tertiary care facilities are academic health science centers. And so we've really developed a focus on research in Canada because it really fits with our health system in Canada. So we have a very robust focus on clinical research in Canada.
Where do you think that's going to go? Are we going to do more research in Canada, not just with Medtronic, but with pharmaceuticals and medical device companies in general, or less? You know, we hear complaints constantly that our pricing is lower, more controlled, and so therefore, you know, more U.S. companies want to do all that work in the United States. What do you think the future is of that kind of research in Canada?
I think research, important research goes to the people who are capable of doing the research. So it really doesn't have much to do with the price environment. I think there may be later phases of research in pharmaceuticals where it's more oriented towards marketing and where these pricing issues may become a factor. But in our case, it's more about finding people who have, breakthrough ideas, who have the capability to do the research and to be very productive and doing a lot of volume in a short period of time that can be used for regulatory submission, this sort of thing.
What's the importance of sort of collaboration and concentration of some of those researchers? You know, Mars, which is down at university and college, bragged that there were more hospitals and medical practitioners and healthcare practitioners in a small radius than almost anywhere else in the world. And then I think that former Mayor Hazen McCallion always bragged about the concentration on Pill Hill in Mississauga Road and the 401 in northern Mississauga. Is that important that you've got sort of educational facilities, hospitals, medical practitioners, medical device companies, pharmaceutical companies, all in a similar area?
Well, it does create a talent pool for one, and having them close to major academic health institutions, gets them engaged in clinical care. So I think those are, we have tremendous concentration in Canada of our health, our tertiary health system in large academic hospitals. So that's where a lot of creativity exists and a lot of expertise. And so it is very attractive to locate your research there.
I always found that you were very interested in participating in some of those organizations and fostering collaboration. Why?
I think it's the recognition that Canada is about 1% of the world healthcare market.
1%.
Yeah.
1%. Seriously, that's it.
Yeah, it's in that range, and the volume that we can do. Financially, we don't have a huge impact on the world of life sciences. But we have such strength in research. That's an area that we can really make a difference. So we really punch above our weight in that area. And also a more recent development has been also in health economics, because health economics are, understandably increasingly important. That, the technology that you use in healthcare has to deliver outcomes at a very cost-effective level. And so it's health economics that actually measures that. And we had the benefit in Canada, and it started really at McMaster University with David Sackett and others who started this whole movement about evidence-based medicine. And then that's blossomed into a number of leading health economic centers across Canada that do world-leading research on cost effectiveness. And in a publicly funded system, and there are many around the world, it's particularly important that the interventions that are done are very cost effective.
You mentioned some of your travel in business and that you got exposed to different healthcare systems. I was on a board of directors of a drug delivery company in France, and so I spent a fair amount of time traveling there. We had a factory and a research facility in Ireland, so I went there. We had a joint venture partner in the UK, so I went there. So I had a similar kind of experience, and then obviously going to the United States on a regular basis for investor meetings and research meetings and manufacturing meetings and sales meetings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You do get exposed to a lot of different healthcare systems. What do you think of the Canadian healthcare system relative to what you were exposed to internationally?
Well, I think that the Canadian health system has great intentions. You know, the Canada Health Act, which really aims to deliver fairness and equity and access and hopefully efficiency. I think these are all very noble goals. But there are many challenges in the reality of delivering that particularly were highlighted during the pandemic. And I think this really relates to the integration of care. And you saw sort of the disconnect between long-term care and hospital care and delivering care in the home and this sort of thing. And so I think that there have been challenges in getting the various provider groups and players in the health system to work together as a true system. And I think that's what's being recognized right now. And I think that's where the focus has got to be. Really, a patient should have a single patient record that follows them, from the onset of illness right through to returning home, but also through their life. And it just seems, I don't know if you experience this, but every time you go to a clinic, you have to fill out a form and they ask all the same questions they did the last time. And, there's a lot of sort of mismanagement of information that goes on, and that needs to be corrected, but also just the handoff between primary care and tertiary care and then perhaps long-term care. These are all really big challenges for the system. And you see in other systems in the world that they do a better job of this. And I think there's much that we can learn from that. And part of it, to get back to my earlier theme, involves technology, the use of available technology to do all these things.
I had a slightly different experience, actually a very, very positive experience in one way with our healthcare system, where I had a cancer scare about a year ago right now. And when they thought that it was something, I was amazed at how the primary care and the hospital and the diagnostic organizations work together. And I was rushed into to some diagnostic stuff within like 48 hours. It was like it was surprising, and everyone seemed to be talking. But then I guess they found out that it wasn't, and I didn't hear anything for the longest time. And I was going like, "Tell me, what's going on?" But it was interesting. When they were worried that it was something, the whole system responded and worked so incredibly quickly and well together. But they didn't have that sort of customer service orientation that a lot of other companies would have to call me back and say, "Don't worry, it was actually something else." And so I had both a very positive experience when it was really important to be positive, but then please tell me what the heck is going on afterwards.
Well, we do have the benefit with cancer care of having a more integrated system. We have Cancer Care Ontario, for example, and most of the provinces have cancer care groups like that. And they do a much better job, as you pointed out, of doing that primary diagnosis and treatment. But perhaps they don't integrate well back into the primary care system and back into the long-term care system. So there's still areas that they could improve, but it's probably really one of the shining lights of our healthcare system is the cancer care system.
That's interesting. I understand that you were part of a federal advisory panel that was actually described as the zombie report, which sounds kind of like an interesting label to get appended to a report. We're going to take a break for some messages, and I'm going to come back and ask our guest the current president and in the future retired president of Medtronic Canada, Neil Fraser, a little bit about his involvement in some federal advisory healthcare innovation studies and councils, and then why the heck it would be called the Zombie Report. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real honor of mine to interview on his announcement of his retirement, Neil Fraser, who is currently but will be the retired president of Medtronic Canada, a medical device company in Canada that I've had the privilege of doing some work with and interacting with Mr. Fraser, and really been quite impressed with him and Medtronic. And his role, not only as president of Medtronic, but his role in the whole society. I got him involved in the Mississauga Summit at one point in time, and some things that were happening in Mississauga in regards to life sciences. I've interviewed him on this radio show previously about different technologies. I ended up interacting with him and some of the people that are within his organization on some interesting technologies that I was developing, and found them incredibly responsive and helpful in their suggestions and feedback. And I also found that Neil got very involved in public policy issues. And so I think that one of the things that someone who's been involved in a career for 38 years with Medtronic has is a sense of what's going on in the industry in general and the healthcare system in general that can really assist all of us. Sir, I understand you were part of a healthcare innovation task force led by Rona Ambrose. Tell us a little bit about that organization and task force and what you came up with, if you could.
Yeah, well, this occurred in 2014, 2015, and the federal health ministry put together a panel to advise them on the state of health innovation in Canada. In other words, the application of new technologies and new processes and ideas in the healthcare system. And so to tackle this, and the group, it was commissioned by Rona Ambrose, the federal health minister at the time in the Harper government, but it was chaired by David Naylor, who was the former president of the University of Toronto and Dean of Medicine and many other things. And to tackle this task, we did a very broad consultation process where we went to every province and territory, and we interviewed people on what they felt was going well and what was lacking and what was needed. We also spoke to many interest groups, Aboriginal health, the professional colleges, patient groups, you name it. It was very broad. We also went to Washington and visited a lot of their large health institutions like AHRQ and NIH and the Brookings Institute. And we also brought in health experts from around the world, Denmark, Australia, Holland, UK, et cetera, to get their thoughts. So it was just a monumental study of healthcare and health policy around the world. The first thing I thought was really interesting is that when we went to all the different provinces, we always hear that every province is different and they have different healthcare problems, and therefore that's why they have unique administration of healthcare by province. And yet the problems that they raised were remarkably similar. I would say the problem set was almost identical in every province, and so it really spoke to the need for provinces to work together and perhaps for the federal government to provide some leadership. Also, when we looked around the world, we saw strengths and weaknesses of different systems. The Australian system, for example, is one where they have tremendous transparency in terms of the performance of hospitals and systems across Australia, and they regularly report. And actually, they're funded based on their performance, which is very interesting in Australia. We heard about the Dutch system, which actually has private insurance managing a public system, but they use the discipline of insurance to really drive productivity, and different providers compete for funding from the insurance industry for their programs, which is really interesting. And then, of course, the National Health Service in the UK, which in some respects the Canadian system was modeled after, but the National Health Service is constantly reinventing itself. And you generally hear more of the negativity than the positivity in the news. But if you look at the international metrics comparisons, the National Health Service is usually at the top of the surveys in terms of their performance on health outcome metrics and efficiency and equity and all of these things. So although much maligned, it's actually a great performer, which is interesting to see. We also we reviewed all the pan-Canadian health organizations like CIHI and Canada Health Infoway and all of the others. There's about 10 of them, and gave them direct feedback on their roles. And then we produced this document, which was released in July of 2015. And it was the summer of 2015 where the writ was dropped on the Harper government. And then that fall, the Trudeau Liberals came in. And so it was very disappointing that with all of this work and comprehensive recommendations, that it became largely ignored and therefore called a zombie report.
Oh, that's why it was called the zombie report.
Yes.
It was just ignored by the successor government.
And that's one of the challenges that we face is the political cycle, is that when a new party comes in, they tend to ignore or sideline work that was done by the previous government for partisan reasons, which is very disappointing because it was done in a very nonpartisan way. There was nothing like none of us were declared as being partisan in any way going into this project. We weren't working for the Conservative Party. We were working for the federal health ministry. But these things get conflated, in the whole political environment.
And you don't think that the successor Liberal government would have picked up that report and reviewed it and maybe interviewed some of you to find out what your recommendations were and why?
Well, I think the bureaucracy, the ministry was very, very happy with the report, and I think they've used it kind of in a quiet way behind the scenes. But it definitely has not informed the national health agenda. And in fact, I think various politicians really don't like to get involved in healthcare, even though they're responsible for administering it, because it seems to be a very politically challenging area. It's hard to be popular when you tinker with healthcare.
Well, our healthcare spend is up dramatically, and I think most analysts think it's going to have to increase dramatically as the baby boom generation ages, and we all get challenged with more medical issues. And whether it's because of pandemic or because of long-term care or because of whatever other thing that's going on, it seems that there always seems to be another emergency. Of late, there's been a lot of articles in the press about lack of nurses, lack of doctors, emergency rooms that get closed down for the weekend in Ottawa and elsewhere. If you were advising a minister of health today, what would you tell them to do?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two things to think about. Definitely in the short term, there's some things that need to be attended to, and you've really nailed one of them is really the health human resource issue. And it's very challenging because our health workers are exhausted, from working through the pandemic. Many of them, have been working around the clock. They've been taken out of their normal work and put into COVID-related work, for example, they've been just working flat out. So I think it's really important to recognize, many people are leaving the professions. So we need to have an antidote to that. And I think part of it is in recognizing the opportunity to license foreign trained health professionals. I think that's going to be really important. And I think, we also have to accelerate the recruitment of people that won't be short term, but into the health professions, such as nursing and different kinds of technicians and technologists and physicians. But in the longer term, I think there's also a problem with the way that things like scope of practice are managed and the licensure that allows people only to practice in one province and things like this. So there are many sort of rigidities in the system that need to be addressed. And then the third thing, getting back to our earlier discussion, is there are many applications of technology that can reduce the amount of work that healthcare providers have to do. Utilization of technology can assist them and make their jobs easier and quicker and allow less redundancy, for example, in data and things like that. So I think short term, we're really in a jam. We've got to fix the crisis, but longer term, we have to address the fundamental productivity issues in the system.
When I was involved in the pharmaceutical business, I was surprised at how long it took a pharmaceutical product to get through research and through testing and then through the approval process. And some people, I don't know whether it was a joke or not, but would state that once it went to Health Canada, would sit, or the FDA would sit on their desk for a year until they picked it up and started reading the submissions. Is the approval timeframe appropriate in pharmaceuticals and/or medical devices?
Well, first of all, an interesting thing happened during the pandemic is that we got vaccines approved in a very short period of time. So it is possible to do that, but under the more conventional framework, we would say that those vaccines were only experimental because we truly did not know about all of the potential, side effects and things like that a longer term study would elucidate. So we operated a little bit blind during the pandemic for the greater good of the population, and it worked. So that's amazing. But it does suggest there could be ways of doing things more rapidly. Maybe we're too conservative about all the requirements on approving a drug. My experience with Health Canada, and we've worked with them very closely during the pandemic, to get things into critical care rapidly. Like they had an interim order that facilitated getting things very quickly into the hands of doctors and nurses that could help save patients' lives. But in order to do that, they had to, forego some of the more conservative measures that they would normally have. But my experience working with Health Canada is that they're very efficient and very knowledgeable, and they're willing to take a stand on issues. They don't have to agree always with other regulators around the world. So I'm not, and I've worked closely with Health Canada on the regulatory pathway improvements, and they've been very, very responsive to feedback from industry on how it could work better.
As you've taken a look at the healthcare system in Canada versus elsewhere, and this is sort of getting into real public policy issues, and so you may or may not want to comment, but you mentioned NIH, which I understand sort of has a private and a public route to funding. The United States clearly has a public and a private route to funding, and Canada is all public funding of at least hospitals and things like that, and doctors, et cetera. What do you think about two-tier medicine versus the universal healthcare system we have in Canada? And do you think, the future, particularly as we see most estimates of dramatically increased healthcare costs in the future?
I've looked at, like, there's a lot of current debate going on in Ontario actually about public versus private, and I think the point is that we all ascribe in Canada to the Canada Health Act so far, unless that's going to be revised at some point. But in saying that, private companies can do many aspects of healthcare and still deliver it publicly, cost effectively. And I think more of that would make a real difference. And you see that in the lab business, and many home care and other services are delivered privately. As long as it's done cost effectively, nobody's excluded. I think it can be extremely effective in improving productivity, and costs in the healthcare system. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing that you're talking about, perhaps, is at the federal level, if they were to tinker with the Canada Health Act and allow greater competition for public and private. That's a much bigger sort of philosophical and political issue that I don't think we're going to see that change, in the near future. So I think we're constrained by the Canada Health Act at this point.
I would agree with you, and I think that's a distinction that you make that is quite helpful. The one payer system with our current system, but different providers. And I got a hernia operation at Shouldice, which a lot of people don't realize is a privately owned hospital, and so we actually have the ability to have privately owned hospitals. And Shouldice is, I believe, renowned around the world as one of the best hospitals to go to for that specific procedure, and I got great care there. So I think
that would be an example, wouldn't it, of privately delivered, publicly financed healthcare.
I agree. So I think there is some flexibility that people should be taking a look at, and home care would be another example where the vast majority of home care, and I've talked to some people in the home care business, and they say there's just no way that the baby boom as we age can be housed in seniors facilities, institutional facilities, nor do we necessarily want to. A lot of people want to age at home, and home care is the only way to solve that problem. And private companies are the best and have been the best way historically to provide that service. So I agree with you. We're going to take.
I would say home care with technology.
Home care with technology. I'll accept that amendment, sir. That friendly amendment. We're going to take a final break for some messages, and come back with some concluding comments. I'm going to ask Neil Fraser, 38 years with Medtronic, 18 years as president of Medtronic, what advice he would give someone that's going to take over leadership of Medtronic, or frankly of any company in the healthcare space, so maybe even any company. What are the secrets to being a successful leader, a successful president? Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real pleasure of mine tonight to be introducing to you and interviewing Neil Fraser, who is the president of Medtronic Canada. He's recently announced his retirement, and he's a gentleman I respect immensely in the healthcare space, and generally just as a really nice, smart guy. Sir, you've been president of a company for 18 years. And I accept that probably medical device and healthcare and life sciences are a little bit different than some other companies, but you've been a leader in your company and within the sort of the public affairs space in regards to healthcare for a long time. What suggestions have you got for either a new leader of Medtronic or a leader of any new company?
I think the number one thing I would say is that it's important to get involved in public policy. First of all, just to educate yourself, because it is a complex system that we live and work in. But also, I think to provide leadership, ideas, challenges into the healthcare system so that it can continue to improve. And I'm told that I've had some impact on the healthcare system, which I find that very flattering. I hope it's true. And I plan, by the way, Brian, to continue to speak out on issues of healthcare policy and hope that I can have a sustained impact on the improvement of the healthcare system for patients. And so I think that's what I would recommend. Get involved.
Get involved. Well, I think that's a good principle for people in almost all walks of life. Get involved. If you don't get involved, it's difficult to blame the system or politics or the community for what you don't like if you don't actually try to change it yourself. I think you've done an incredible job, sir, both leading your company as well as being involved in the community. And so I thank you for that. And I wish you all the best in your retirement. And if there's a healthcare policy or another policy that you're passionate about, that you want to use this vehicle to publicize it and talk about it, you're welcome back anytime. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you all for joining us. Neil Fraser, the retiring president of Medtronic Canada, has been our guest. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Neil, for sharing some of your thoughts about the medical device, healthcare, life sciences business in Canada. I remind you, everyone, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Minneapolis at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.